The true weight of her guilt doesn't come from a heated argument or a long winded text explaining how much she hurt you. It stems from the haunting silence you leave in your wake. When you go absolute zero, you aren't just stopping the communication. You are removing the noise she uses to distract herself from her own actions. Most people think they need to have the last word to win, but the most devastating move is actually providing no words at all. By denying her the we need to talk conversation or the neatly packaged emotional closure she expects, you leave her with a massive, uncomfortable void that she cannot fill. In a typical breakup, your anger or your pleading acts as a shield for her. If you're yelling, she can focus on your aggression. If you're begging, she can focus on your weakness. But when you disappear into total silence, that shield vanishes. Guilt cannot breathe in a room filled with noise and distractions. It requires a vacuum to grow. In the quiet, the mental tapes she tried to bury begin to replay on a loop. Without your voice there to interrupt her internal dialogue or provide a new conflict to focus on, her mind has no choice but to look backward. This absence of information creates a psychological pressure cooker. Because you aren't there to provide a fresh narrative, the past naturally becomes louder and more vivid than the present. She starts to analyze every moment of the relationship without the interference of your current feelings. Your silence forces her to sit in a room with her own conscience, and that is a far more brutal confrontation than any speech you could ever deliver. By saying nothing, you aren't just walking away. You are letting the silence do the heavy lifting of holding her accountable. The initial instinct to stay silent often feels like a defeat. It feels as though by not defending your name or highlighting her mistakes, you are handing her a win and letting her walk away with a clean conscience. However, this is a fundamental misunderstanding of power. Real sustainable power doesn't need to shout to be felt, it resides in restraint. Choosing silence isn't an absence of action. It is a deliberate act of extreme emotional discipline. It is the refusal to give away any more of your energy to someone who no longer protects it. When you stop chasing, stop explaining your pain, and stop trying to make her see your side, you strip away every distraction she has. You leave her alone in a room with the one person she's been trying to avoid, herself. By removing your voice from the equation, you force her to confront the reality of who you actually were versus the villain she may have tried to make you out to be. In the quiet, she begins to recall the moments of patience you gave for free, the times you stayed calm when she was chaotic, and the repeated forgiveness you offered when it would have been easier to walk away. During the relationship, she treated these things as if they were a permanent, unlimited resource. She viewed your loyalty as a lifetime guarantee that would always be there regardless of how she acted. She thought she had a subscription to your emotional support that would never expire. Now that you have vanished, that sense of security is shattered. The memories of your kindness, which used to provide her with a sense of comfort and safety, have suddenly shifted their tone. Because you are no longer there to provide that warmth on demand, those same memories begin to feel like accusations. Every time she remembers how good you were to her, it highlights how poorly she handled that gift. Your absence transforms your past grace into her current regret. She is forced to realize that the person she took for granted wasn't weak for staying. They were strong for choosing to leave and stay gone. Regret is rarely a sudden explosion. It is a slow motion car crash that unfolds over weeks and months. It begins as a quiet whisper in the back of her mind, a stray thought at 2 a.m. when the world is silent, or a specific song that catches her off guard in the middle of a grocery store. In the beginning, she will fight these feelings with logic. She will try to rationalize her choices by telling herself she was right to leave or by focusing on your flaws to convince herself you weren't enough. This is her ego's way of protecting her from the discomfort of her own decisions. She builds a wall of excuses to keep the guilt at bay, believing that if she can justify her actions enough, the heavy feeling in her chest will disappear. But guilt is far more patient than her ego. It doesn't need to win the argument today. It simply waits for the distractions of her life to fade away. As the initial high of the breakup or the novelty of being single wears off, the silence you've left behind begins to do its work. She starts to engage in an involuntary game of comparison. She looks at the new people in her life, the exciting and unpredictable options she thought she wanted, and she begins to notice the gaps. She starts comparing your steady consistency to their sudden disappearance and your emotional safety to their lack of depth. The very things she once found boring or guaranteed suddenly look like the rarest treasures she's ever encountered. Eventually, the narrative she constructed to make herself the hero of the story begins to crack. It is impossible to maintain a lie when there is no new conflict from you to fuel it, because you aren't there to provide fresh reasons for her to be angry or defensive. She is left with nothing but the raw truth of how you actually treated her. The truth has a way of resurfacing the moment there is no more noise to drown it out. She realizes that while she was chasing something better, she walked away from something that was actually solid. The slow burn of regret isn't about one big mistake. It's the realization that she traded a diamond for a handful of shiny rocks, and now the person who held that diamond is nowhere to be found. There is a deep irony in the way people handle breakups. Usually, the more you try to chase someone or explain your pain, the more you are actually helping them feel better about themselves. If you are still calling, texting, or begging for another chance, you are acting as her emotional shield. By staying in the picture, you give her something to react to, something to call desperate or annoying, which allows her to focus on your behavior instead of her own. Your presence absorbs the blow of her bad decisions because it keeps the dynamic active. As long as you are there trying to prove your worth, she doesn't have to face the fact that she threw it away. You are essentially providing her with an emotional safety net that prevents her from ever hitting the hard ground of reality. The moment you remove yourself entirely, that shield vanishes, and she is left completely exposed to her own conscience. Without your voice there to argue against or your messages to ignore, the weight of her choices has nowhere to go but inward. This is when the psychological tide turns. Instead of seeing you as the person who won't leave her alone, she starts seeing the version of you she actually hurt. She begins to vividly recall the look of disappointment on your face when she dismissed your feelings, or the countless times you swallowed your pride just to keep the peace between you. In your absence, these moments lose their guaranteed status and transform into something far more heavy. When you are no longer there to offer forgiveness or absorb her mistakes, those memories transition from simple past events into unpaid emotional debts. She realizes that you were carrying the relationship on your back, and now that you've dropped the weight and walked away, she is the one left standing in the wreckage. Your silence forces her to audit her own behavior without any interference from you. She is no longer fighting with you. She is fighting with the memory of how well you treated her and how poorly she responded to it. By choosing to go silent, you stop being her protector and start being the person whose absence highlights her greatest failure. Silence is the most definitive way to say, "I'm done," without uttering a single word. It acts as a firm boundary that declares you are no longer willing to carry the burden of her mistakes or provide a landing pad for her poor choices. When you stop engaging, the reality of the situation finally begins to crush her because the power dynamic has shifted. She is forced to confront a devastating truth. You didn't walk away because your love faded or because you stopped caring. You walked away because you finally reached a level of self-respect where you cared about yourself more than you cared about being mistreated. This shift in your energy from being her constant supporter to being your own priority is what makes your absence feel so heavy and permanent. As the silence stretches on, she begins to realize that the loss is much deeper than just losing a partner. She realizes she lost the specific way you made her feel, the safety, the validation, and the unwavering support that she once took for granted. Because you were always there, she operated under the false assumption that your presence was a permanent fixture in her life, like a safety net she never had to worry about breaking. This arrogance led her to stop protecting the relationship. She assumed there would always be another chance, another apology, or another day to make it right. Now that the access has been revoked, she has to sit with the reality that she didn't just lose you. She discarded a rare kind of loyalty that isn't easily replaced. In this stage, her mind becomes a courtroom where she is forced to play every role: the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury. Without you there to defend yourself or argue your case, she is left to cross examine her own behavior. She replays the moments she was cold, the times she was selfish, and the instances where she chose her own ego over your connection. Because there is no external noise to distract her, the internal trial always reaches the same undeniable verdict. She had something extraordinary, and she let it slip through her fingers because she thought she had forever to appreciate it. Your silence is the sentence she has to serve. And it serves as a constant reminder that once you realize your own worth, you don't stick around to be undervalued twice. The final stage of her guilt arrives when she realizes that while she is mentally trapped in the past, you have already started building a future. This creates a haunting contrast. She is stuck in old mistakes while you are moving toward new horizons. If she sees you from a distance or hears about your life, she will notice something deeply unsettling. You didn't collapse under the weight of the breakup. You didn't lash out. You didn't go on a mission for revenge, and you didn't post desperate pleas for attention. Instead, you did the one thing she never expected. You simply evolved. There is nothing more damaging to her ego than seeing you thrive without needing a single word of apology or validation from her. It proves that your happiness was never dependent on her approval, which makes her realize how much power she has truly lost. This evolution turns you into a ghost of the person she used to know, replaced by a version of you that no longer has a space for her. By choosing to grow in silence, you send a message that is far more powerful than any angry phone call or emotional text. That message is clear: I know my value, and I am no longer interested in begging you to see it. This level of self assurance is intimidating because it shows her that you have reached a place of peace that she cannot touch or disrupt. Your silence becomes a mirror that reflects her own lack of growth. While she is still dealing with the mess she made, you have already cleaned your hands and moved on. Ultimately, your success becomes the loudest statement you can make. When a person hurts you, they often expect you to stay small, to hurt publicly, or to wait around for them to fix what they broke. When you refuse to do any of those things, you break the hold they had over you. Her guilt intensifies because she realizes she didn't just break your heart. She lost access to the person you were becoming. She is left wondering how someone she underestimated could be so strong while you are too busy living your life to care about the answer. Your evolution is the final proof that her presence was a choice you made, not a necessity you required. You don't have to lift a finger to punish her because life is already doing the work through her own reflection. True guilt only reaches its peak when it collides with finality. The moment she realizes the door isn't just closed, it's locked from the inside. Up until now, she may have lived with the subconscious hope that she could always find her way back to you, but your persistent silence eventually kills that illusion. It's important to understand that staying silent isn't a game of manipulation or a tactic to get her back. It is a profound act of self-respect. You aren't trying to win a breakup. You are simply refusing to participate in a dynamic that no longer serves your well-being. By staying silent, you are declaring that your peace is no longer up for negotiation. If there comes a day when she finally reaches out, it won't be because she suddenly forgot what happened or because the air has cleared. It will be because her guilt has finally matured into clarity. She will have had enough time in the void you left to see the full picture of what she did and what she lost. However, the most powerful part of this journey is that by the time she reaches that realization, it won't even matter to you. Your healing wasn't dependent on her understanding her mistakes. You didn't stay quiet to make her feel bad. You stayed quiet to stop sacrificing your mental health for someone who could only see your value once you became a memory. The final lesson is one of complete detachment. You eventually reach a point where you no longer need her to apologize or even to feel the guilt you've allowed to grow. The goal was never to change her mind, it was to change your own life. You realize that the version of you she is finally starting to regret is a version that no longer exists in her world. You've moved from being an option she can return to a lesson she has to live with. Your silence is the final period at the end of a long sentence, proving that the most powerful thing you can do for yourself is to walk away and never look back to see if they're following.